session. Our next session is with New York State Assembly woman Gina Salidi. Like I said, we got unable to make it, so we will have Gina do her 2-minute introduction, and then we will start the questions just like the previous session. Okay? Thank you.
All right. All right, good evening, everyone. I'm not going to use the microphone. I feel like you guys can hear me just fine. My name is Gina Salidi. I am your New York State Assembly person, and I'm just about to complete my very first term in office. You know, it's been a tumultuous time these first couple of years, but, you know, we're looking towards a future post-pandemic and our new world and this, you know, sort of new normal that we're living in. You know, and I've had a lot going on in this first term in office. We've delivered, you know, record funding for our school districts, $2 million in grants for our fire departments and first responders, advocated for important fixes to bail reform, which is why I'm backed by the men and women of law enforcement. It's been just, you know, a really incredible time in office. Delivered billions of dollars in infrastructure projects, as well as money to combat climate change. But we're going to be getting to all that later tonight. I really wanted to address sort of, you know, the elephant in the room, as they say, and really something incredibly disturbing that came to light last week or late last week. And if you don't mind, I'm going to read off of this because I really don't want to miss anything. Some of you might have seen social media posts from my opponent that are quite appalling. He's made disgusting comments against Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, Chinese, and anybody who's been following me or my campaign, you know I've run a campaign that is incredibly positive, and I've worked hard to just be a positive person. And I don't believe in taking shots for political purposes, but this is not that. Words matter, right? The things that we say as leaders matter. And we've seen where rhetoric, the wrong rhetoric, the hateful rhetoric, can lead. And I don't want to hear it's a joke. You know, too many elected officials, they hide behind so-called humor to minimize hate, bigoted, or sexist rhetoric enough. And this is not an isolated incident by my opponent. It's a pattern of racist rhetoric going back years. I've run out of time, but that is where I stand on this, and I look forward to representing everyone in my district. And thank you very much.
Asian Americans are among the fastest growing minority populations in this region. According to the most recent census data, the town of North Hempstead in particular saw a 62% increase in the Asian American population over the last decade. With Asian Americans as such a large and growing part of the regional population, can you discuss your relationships and support of the AAPI community throughout your career?
Sure. So, I mean, I represent an incredibly amazing, diverse, beautiful district. But before I even came into office, I used to work for the town of North Hempstead in a department called Community Services. And one of the first events that I did because of the growing population of Asian Americans in North Hempstead, this was back in 2010. You all ever heard of Asian American Festival that the town does? I started that event. That was my thank you. It was a labor of love and just to celebrate our different cultures, because the more we know about each other, the more, you know, we live together and love together. And then I came into office, right? And recognizing that diverse community that we had, I made sure I hired somebody on my staff that was Asian American, so there's representation in my office. And then also, you know, last year at the height of violence against Asian New Yorkers, you know, we attended rallies, which were important. It was important that we all stood together, but it was also important to take action. So a few things that we did. My office hosted an online self-defense course right around that time. 350 participants, you guys. It was incredible. It was so successful, we actually hosted a second one in person at a local park. But also, you have the rise of anti-Semitism as well. And my office partnered with the JCC in Roslyn, and we created a pilot program called A Walk in My Shoes, where we brought in high school students of different faiths and backgrounds to kind of talk about their life experiences and the biases that, that we don't even think about, that we have towards one another. It was really an incredible experience to see young people interacting that way. And lastly, speaking of education and young people, we co-hosted with Senator Anna Kaplan, who you guys just saw, a rally to combat hate through education. Hundreds of people turned out of a piece of legislation that I'm co-sponsoring in the New York State Assembly that would bring Asian American curriculum mandated in our schools, which I think is important to have. Rallies are important, but so are actions, and that's some of the things my office has done, and myself included. Thank you.
Crime, as we know it, has become a primary concern of residents. Specific to Asian and Asian Americans, the start of the COVID-19 pandemic brought with it an increase nationwide in anti-Asian harassment and violent crime.
Yep.
How would you plan to combat crime, and specifically, how would you address racially motivated hate crime?
Sure. So, as I mentioned before, words matter. The things that people in leadership positions say matter, and they have consequences, because we've seen time and again where hateful words and rhetoric can lead. And so it starts with electing the right people in office, right? People that don't make jokes about COVID or how people choose to express their religion, whether that's through a kippah, a hijab, a turban, or anything else. It's also important, of course, to have the right laws in place. So this year, one of the things that was important is when it comes to hate crimes is I made sure that all hate crimes were arrestable rather than just being a simple appearance ticket. And they'll see a judge who will have discretion. So I think that's an important thing to note. Finally, as I mentioned before, I'm endorsed by law enforcement. They trust me to represent them in Albany, and they trust me to be your voice in Albany as well. So, thank you.
And a recent topic being discussed nationwide is the Supreme Court's decision on Roe v. Wade. What is your stance on the Supreme Court's decision, and how do you believe it should factor into New York's approach to this?
Absolutely. So, for me personally, and I'm going to talk about this in very personal terms, I was personally devastated by the Supreme Court's decision, but New York really got to work right away. We wanted to make sure that New York not only continued to protect women, but we also wanted to make sure that we protected doctors from criminal retaliation from whatever was happening in other states. So, and also, going back to that personal, it's a personal decision between a woman and her doctor. We're seeing women across the country suffering because doctors are refusing care even when a pregnancy isn't viable. It's not right. It's not right, and it's not going to happen, and it should never happen in New York. So again, last session we passed a series of legislative measures that would protect doctors from criminal prosecution just because they're providing health care for women. And additionally, this is important too, we passed the Equality Amendment. The Equality Amendment will basically enshrine a woman's right to reproductive health care in our Constitution. So whoever wins this election will have to vote for this amendment again for a second time, and then it'll go before the voters. And I will be voting yes on that measure, so thank you.
So as we know, the cost of goods, cost of housing, and taxes are rising. Many residents of New York, particularly younger adults, are finding it difficult to establish their lives here and may end up having to leave the state. How would you help to address the high cost of living here in New York State to ensure we retain our residents?
Sure. So a couple of things. So the good news is overall statewide, the population in New York has actually gone up according to the last census. The population on Long Island, though, is aging and it's stagnant. Why is that? It's really expensive to live here, you guys know. When our kids go away to school, we want nothing more for them to come back and live here. Wherever they go to school, We want them to come back home. We want them to raise their families. But we have a housing crisis. We have a housing crisis not only on Long Island, but across New York. You know, the inventory is so small that it sends, you know, house prices and rental prices through the roof. So we have to look at, you know, smart development, transit-oriented development in our downtowns. Places where people could, you know, walk to restaurants, walk to jobs, take the train, walk to their places of worship. And then for me personally, I mentioned before, we delivered record funding for our school district. Anna talked about it before. 42% increase since I came into office in the 16th Assembly District. We have some of the best schools in New York, and I want to make sure that we keep them that way. And we got to continue to deliver local funds to the local governments and the schools again when I'm next year, so we can rely less on property taxes. Speaking of property taxes, we pushed really hard for the property tax rebate check this year, and I also actually wrote the bill for the gas tax holiday so Nassau County could opt in so we can get some relief at the pump. And this issue, by the way, and just so you guys know, is incredibly personal to me. My husband and I, he's here in the audience, we're renters. We grew up here. We would love to buy a home here, but it's really, really hard. So I get it, and I'm working for you guys every day to make sure Long Island is affordable and a place that we can stay at and for our children to come back home to. So thank you.
So our last question is about flooding. We received record rainfall and flooding in our communities, which has led to much property damage. If re-elected, what can you do to help property owners minimize their damages and improve the infrastructure to prevent those floods?
Sure. Climate change is real. Climate change is here. We saw it last year firsthand. Most of you guys are from Herrick's. We saw record flooding, right? We had literal rivers running through people's homes. Herrick's Road and Hillside were flooded for days. I was able, right after the storm, I went and I knocked on doors, literally talked to people in their homes, saw damage firsthand. FEMA came in. They helped people a little bit, but it wasn't enough. I have a person in my district, his name is Hassan Imam. I went to his house. He actually had a mudslide come onto his property. And FEMA came in, they gave him $14,000 maybe. He had tens of thousands of dollars in damage. So went back to the legislature, I'm like, we have to help people in our district. They're not gonna be able to rebuild their homes or prepare for future storms. So I was able to secure $41 million in a dedicated Hurricane Ida relief fund that homeowners can use to rebuild their property and to strengthen it for future storms. But also, we pushed for more money in things like municipal stormwater grants. So what is that? We have so many different layers of government, right? We got the towns, we got the villages, we got the county, and they all have their own sort of infrastructure. So this is money that they can use to like expand and upgrade. Right now, the rain came, there's no place for it to go because we weren't ready for it. These 500-year storms are not happening every 500 years. They're happening now, right? So we have to be prepared for it. And then Senator Kaplan mentioned it before, the Environmental Bond Act, $4.2 billion. That sounds like a lot of money, but it's up to you to make sure that happens. And this is money that is going to come back to Long Island, and I'm going to make sure it comes back to Long Island. It is money for shoreline resiliency. It's money for infrastructure upgrades. It's all the things that we need to do to prepare for these every 500-year storms that are happening more and more often. So that's something that I'm going to be pushing for next year, and you're going to have a champion in me in making sure we get those dollars right here in this district. Thank you.
Do you have any closing remarks in 2 minutes, and then we'll take another break?
Oh, sure. Well, first of all, I'm going to stick around if anybody wants to have any kind of one-on-one with me, of course. But I just wanted to say, I've only been in office a year and 10 months, but it has been an honor and a privilege. I like traveling to Albany, as crazy as that sounds, but I like being in the district even more. I love meeting people. I love getting to know you. It has been the cornerstone of my time in office to be open, accessible, transparent. Everyone is welcome in my office. Everybody is welcome in my world. Even if we don't always disagree, if we don't always agree, you will always have a respectful ear with me, and I will be your voice and I will be your advocate. And by the way, I don't want to dwell, and I don't want to go back to the things that, you know, my opponent said, because I want to celebrate the beauty. I want to celebrate the beauty in this room. I want to celebrate the beauty of my district and of Long Island. These are the things that really matter. You know, we've seen where hate can take us, and I just want to be a positive, loving force for this community and for the next generation, because at the end, love wins, right? And so again, it's been my honor to see you, to serve, and I hope it will be my honor to serve for years to come. So thank you so much.
We're going to take another 10-minute break, but as Gina says, she's going to be around here to mingle, have some refreshments. Please, you can approach Gina for a short question.
Hi.